guys, Steve Buchenroth back with you. The purpose of today's video is to help you understand multi-engine aerodynamics. So let's take this topic and start with it on the ground. So imagine ourselves being in this diamond twin star, right here in this twin star, and we're getting ready to take off. So as soon as we bring the power up, we're going to be dealing with a couple of, I'll use a red color here, but we're going to be dealing with a couple of vectors from the prop. So as soon as we bring the power up, we've got the downward blade and the upward blade that's pulling us forward. Same with this propeller too. These are all supposed to be of the same length. But here's these propellers pulling the aircraft forward, and as soon as we let off the brakes, we'll find that the airplane wants to really go this way. You're going to really have to use a lot of rudder. So why is that? Well, we go back to the basics of the 4 turning tendencies. So we're talking about the 4 turning tendencies as they affect us on the ground. So starting right away, we're gonna realize that we've got, I'm gonna get rid of this here, we're gonna realize we've got torque. So we start off, we've got this propeller turning this way. We've got this propeller turning this way. And of course, that makes the aircraft want to roll. And it wants to roll this way. But the problem here is that the airplane is on the ground. So it can't really roll. But what it does, there's a tire in here, the tire down here. And what that does is that causes a ground friction force. It puts pressure on this left tire and it pulls this side back, a little bit of yaw. And it probably happens here, but not nearly as much yaw. So if you look at the PHAC and you read about it, it tells us, and that's the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, it tells us that as both blades turn to the right, the aircraft wants to roll to the left, putting a downward pressure on that wheel, creating ground friction and pulling that plane back into a yaw. So torque starts off as a roll, but it actually on the ground, it yaws the airplane to the left due to the downward pressure on the wheel. Now, the second thing that's going on here, we're going to move on to spiraling slipstream. We'll get rid of these. We'll move on to spiraling slipstream. What happens is, and this is not meant to be some sort of a perfect artist rendition here, but what happens is the slipstream from the left engine is going to come back and hit the vertical fin where the slipstream from this propeller comes back and hits nothing. So as we put the pressure on this vertical fin right here, what happens is it pushes that over here to the right and the airplane yaws to the left. So we all know that from our basic private pilot flying that spiraling slipstream yaws the airplane to the left. However, what we probably forget a lot of times is that it rolls the airplane to the right. The reason it rolls that airplane to the right, we have to understand that there's a longitudinal axis right here. And what happens here, we're going to use this airplane with a broken winglet here. As this airflow comes back around, the vertical fin yaws it to the left. But this tail, this vertical fin, this rudder and this vertical stabilizer, they sit above. They sit above the longitudinal axis. So as it sits above the longitudinal axis, there's an arm here. And so a torque is created and it actually rolls the airplane to the right. So spiraling slipstream comes back, hits the tail, yaws it left. But as it hits that vertical stabilizer, it not only yaws it left, it sits above the longitudinal axis and it rolls it to the right. Okay, that as you know, is spiraling slipstream. So left yaw coupled with right roll. Now, we're going to skip on P factor. We're going to cover that with just words. We're not raising a tail, nor are we pulling the airplane off the ground quickly. So gyroscopic precession is of negligible, very small effect, so much so that we really don't have anything to say about that. So now let's move on to the last one, P factor. As we have added power, what we did here was we had both of our ascending blades right here, and both of our descending blades, they pretty much all made the same amount of thrust. But as soon as the aircraft broke ground, as soon as the airplane put an angle of attack on it, we now have the effect of P factor on downward blades. So the downward blade, as soon as I give an angle of attack, here it is going down the runway, rotation, now I have an angle of attack. And that angle of attack on the downward blade is a greater angle of attack than it is on the upward ascending blade. So we kind of get something like this. Let's get rid of these highlights here so we can do a better drawing job. So imagine that the downward blade now grows a bit. We don't know how much, but we'll just put this out there just so we can show something. It grows a bit. Now we've got to understand that the upward blade doesn't have the same angle of attack. So that ascending or upward blade, it's going to look more like this. So in a normal takeoff scenario, you've got something like this going on. You've got the two upward blades, ascending blades, creating less force due to P factor than the two downward blades. The two downward blades are, again, getting us more force. So now, as soon as you take off, you really need a lot of right rudder as soon as you go airborne. So let's summarize. As soon as we add power to the engines, it wants to go to the left. All right, so the airplane is going to take us left. Now, what happens is we get spiraling slipstream. It also wants to take us left, but the spiraling slipstream also wants to roll us right, and it counters torque. If we go to the PHAC and read it, it'll tell us that it counters torque. Now we look at the fact that there is not really any gyroscopic precession factored in here, and then we move on to P factor. So as soon as we give the airplane an angle of attack, the downward blades take a bigger bite, give us more thrust or more pull due to P factor on the right side of each blade, the downward bite, and then the upward has less. So now we've got a lot of yaw from that. So there we have it, summarizing the four forces as we push the power up, go down the runway. We're dealing with torque, spiraling slipstream. Now, as soon as we rotate, we add to it P factor. All right, so now let's say we're climbing out. We're going to take this airplane. We're going down the runway. We've got relative wind. As soon as we climb out, relative wind starts to follow. So it's not that it's completely no angle of attack, but it's not slow flight. Slow flight would look like this. Climbing flight would look more something like this. So the angle of attack on climbing flight is less than it would be on slow flight. But let's say now we climb out on two engines. We've got an angle of attack. We've got relative wind here. We've got an overall angle of attack. We're climbing out around 1,200 feet per minute. Now, what happens when I lose an engine? Well, as soon as I lose an engine, I have an immediate increase in parasite drag. When that happens, the airplane was climbing out 1,200 feet per minute. Now the best it's going to do is 80 to 95% less. It's going to be about maybe 200 feet per minute. So now the deck angle hasn't really changed a lot, but the relative wind has. So just by the mere fact that I was climbing from 1,200 feet per minute down around 200 feet per minute, the angle of attack has increased dramatically. So the first thing that we're faced with when we lose an engine right away, we're going to kind of diagram this out for us, but one of the first things we're faced with here is the fact that we have a significant amount of parasite drag. So we'll kind of go through it like this. So we'll start with control problems. So from a control standpoint, the first thing we get is a large increase in parasite drag. Parasite drag goes up quite a bit. And from that, we get a significant change in relative wind. And that relative wind change gives us, we don't need to put an arrow there, it's a relative wind change. What that does, though, is gives us a significant increase in AOA, angle of attack. So angle of attack has went up quite a bit. And with angle of attack comes what? Well, with angle of attack comes a pretty good increase in P factor. But let's kind of start back over. We've got parasite drag. We've got a change in relative wind. We've got an increase in angle of attack. And now we also have a lot less, a much lower climb rate. Climb rate is much less. We also end up with a pretty good increase in P factor. That happens to us. And then we get a big increase because the angle of attack is up in induced drag. So now, with that kind of increase in induced drag, what's going to happen to us with an increase in P factor? We get a pretty good decrease in speed, velocity. And of course, with less airflow over the rudder, what we then get is much less rudder authority, rudder effectiveness, rudder control, however you want to look at it. So let's kind of walk through these things right here. We're taking off. We're going to get rid of some things and make it a little easier. We're going to kind of get rid of this stuff. Now, we just rotated. We've got P factor. We've increased the P factor here on the right wing, on the right downward blade. And we've done the same thing on the left engine's right downward blade. But now what we're going to say is we just lost an engine. Let's just say we lost the left engine. So let's go through here. We'll take all this out. We're going to draw a big red X over this left engine. It's doing nothing for us, giving us all drag. Now, what happens here as that airplane starts slowing down, I've got to compensate for that lift. We've got lift that equals 1/2 times the density of the air times the velocity squared times C sub L. We're just going to write an angle of attack. Hey guys, I made a mistake in the video, but here's the proper lift equation. Lift equals 1/2 times the air density depicted by the Greek letter rho times the velocity squared times the surface area of the wing times the coefficient of lift. In the video, I show that lift equals 1/2 rho v squared times the angle of attack. Using angle of attack simplifies the coefficient of lift. And of course, I already mentioned that I left out the surface area of the wing. You might want to jot this down in your notes. Now, let's continue with the video. So if I want to keep my lift equal and not lose anything here, I want to keep my lift equal, and I've got the speed decreasing because I lost an engine, okay, then something's going to come up, and that's going to be angle of attack. So as angle of attack comes up, what happens is P factor starts increasing. So as I slow, P factor increases. As I slow more, P factor increases. So what happens is the more I slow, the higher the angle of attack. The higher the angle of attack, the more the P factor. Eventually, we get into an airplane that looks something like this. We'll just kind of erase all these little arrows here. We'll take it out. We'll say, look, we've got this going on, getting higher and higher and higher, bigger and bigger and bigger. And then the opposite blade is maybe something like this here. Of course, this engine is out. So that's giving me, if I feathered it properly, we shouldn't be getting a lot of drag off of it, but we might be getting some. I'm going to erase it to get it out of our way. What's happening now is we've got a center of gravity. So we end up with an arm here, and we end up with the force here. So we've got this kind of a torque situation going on. Let's call this force 2. It's engine 2. That's our force 2. And let's call this arm over here arm 2. We're talking about this arm right here. So we'll call that arm 2. So that is really trying to pull us to the left, right? So we've got to counter that with something. What is that something we counter that with? Well, we've got our distance back to our rudder, something like this, back to the rudder. That's our arm, and now we're taking, it's being countered with the force of the rudder. So what's happening right here is the force 1, the rudder force, and arm 1, the distance from the center of gravity here back to the rudder, is countering arm 2 and force 2. So it's just basically moments operating against each other. So I'm going to erase the ground information we talked about, and now we're going to have a little more room here to talk about what's going on. So we know that any given time, force 1 from the rudder times arm 1 from the CG back to the rudder, that's a moment. And it must always be greater than, or be capable of being greater than, force 2 times arm 2. If at any time force 2 times arm 2 gets bigger than force 1 times arm 1, we've got a serious problem. What's going to happen is that airplane is going to go into a VMC roll. We're going to completely lose control of that airplane. And of course, it'll start in on that VMC, and it will quickly enter a spin. In the 2024 year, I'm aware of 9 people that got killed just doing VMC demos during multi-engine training. So it's really critical that we understand, if we let that force of F2, or that torque of F2 times A2, get greater than F1 times A1, we're going to die. We're not going to be able to get that thing out of the VMC roll, and it's going to enter a spin. Now, if we have enough altitude, we might be able to get out of it, but we've got to apply the spin controls, anti-spin controls, right? So every airplane is different. If we think about anti-spin controls in a Cessna, it's typically pair. If we're in a mall, it's REAP, R-E-A-P. If we're in a Cirrus, it's going to be caps pull. If we're in a Tomahawk, it's going to be a rep. But today, we're in a Diamond. So our anti-spin control is PREA. P-R-E-A. Power, rudder, elevator, aileron. So this is what we do today to get out of a spin in this airplane. So I'm going to erase these here, and we're going to be thinking about Priya. So how do we get out of that spin? Well, we pull power to idle. We do our rudder full opposite, elevator forward, and aileron neutral. Now, why do we do that? Well, we pull power to idle to lower the nose. We take power off, we lower the nose, and we're going to cause it to drop down and help us recover from the stall. We also are pulling power to stop torque. So lower the nose, stop or minimize torque. That's why we're pulling power. A lot of times people will say, well, I don't want to go faster towards the ground. Well, we do. We want to go faster by getting the nose over, go faster and reattach the airflow to the stalled wing. So lower thy nose to stop the torque and to speed the airplane up. Lower the nose. All right, now rudder opposite. Why? To brake. Rudder opposite to brake the yaw. Help us stop the spin. Elevator forward. Why? Well, to break the stall, right? Break the stall. And now, why do we want ailerons neutral? Well, we want to have the aileron neutral because the last thing we want to do is aggravate that stall. So if this airplane was just started to spin and I went over like this and it starts to go, the last thing we want to do is to try to pick this wing up with an aileron. Because when we try to pick this wing up with an aileron, we've increased the angle of attack on an already stalled wing, further aggravating it, causing it to drop farther, and also causing this aileron here, which is going to be down, causing this down aileron to bring me around and just kickstart the spin right away. So we get out of a spin in the diamond twin star by applying Priya, power to idle to lower the nose, stop the torque, rudder to break the yaw, elevator forward to break the stall, keep the aileron neutral so I don't aggravate it. So let's kind of summarize where we're at. At all times, we have to keep this side here, this force one and this arm one, bigger than we're ever going to keep the other side, force two and arm two. Anytime force two, arm two gets bigger, it's going to BMC roll, spin. We're going to try to go Priya and get out of it. But if we don't have the altitude, we have no hope of getting out of that spin. Okay, let's kind of pick up where we were now on controls. We've got, when we lose the engine, we know that we start in with an immediate bunch of parasite drag. That changes our relative wind and causes an increase in our angle of attack. Remember, we're taking off, relative wind follows. As soon as we lose an engine, we went from 1,200 feet per minute to maybe 200 feet per minute. Relative wind being opposite of our flight path, it drops like this, and our angle of attack is now here versus here. So the angle of attack increases even if we bring the nose over some. All right, what happens is our climb rate goes way down, it diminishes. Our P factor gets much bigger, our induced drag gets much bigger, our speed decreases, our relative wind over our rudder slows way down. We don't have the rudder effectiveness or the rudder authority, however you want to look at it. And when that happens to us, we do not have the ability to counter that torque and cause that airplane to not spin. All right, now these things we talked about were all kind of control and pitch items. Now, why is it that airplane wants to yaw the way it does? Well, it wants to yaw due to fact that we've got uh, we've got the right engine pulling hard, pulling us around this way, and we've got, of course, a drag pulling us around this way. Asymmetric thrust. So why do we yaw like that? Well, we have asymmetric thrust. Why do we roll? Well, a couple reasons why we roll. One of the reasons we roll so much is the fact that as the airplane starts to yaw, a yawing airplane can become a rolling airplane because we're advancing one wing and the other wing's coming back. But the other big reasons for this is the fact that if we look at this wing here, it's got airflow. It's got airflow over this wing from the prop. But this wing here, no airflow from the prop at all. It's got the relative wind, but no airflow from the prop. So those combined things there, those combined items of the fact that the airplane wants to yaw and wants to roll, coupled with the pitch issues, that creates an airplane that can get out of control on us in a hurry. Okay, so there's our pitch, our yaw, and our roll issues. Now, let's take a look at our performance issues. Why is it that this airplane, when I lose an engine, goes from having a climb rate of, say, 1,200 feet per minute down to maybe 200 feet per minute? So we're going to cover that in what we call the performance right here. So in the performance side of it, here's the question. Why is it when we lose 50% of our engines, we lose 50% of our engines, that yields a loss of 80% to 95% of our climb rate, of our performance? Well, it's pretty simple, really. The Diamond Twin Star has 135 horsepower per engine. So let's add those up. We have two engines in this example, and we have 270 horsepower. Well, let's say we needed 120. We're picking that number out in midair, but let's say we need 120 horsepower for level flight. Then what we have, if we do that math, is we have 150 excess horsepower. It's 150 excess horsepower. But if we have one engine down, we've got 135 horsepower plus 0, doing the same equation. We now have 135 horsepower minus 120 horsepower. So now, after losing one engine, we only have 15 excess horsepower. Remember, we climb due to excess horsepower. We went from 150 excess to 15 excess. And because of that, when we lose one engine, in this case of this airplane, we go from about 1,200 feet per minute down to about maybe 200. 120, 150, 200, just depends on the day. So we've walked through here so far, and we've considered control issues. We've considered performance issues. We're going to talk about side slip as well. But one of the things we want to talk about here is a critical engine. The left engine is critical on Diamond Twin Star. And the biggest reason the left engine is critical, you could say there's more than one, but the biggest reason it's critical is if we lose the left engine, you can see, I'm going to draw this really big, that the arm moves farther away from the airplane, right? And it moves out to here at the end of this prop due to P factor. What if we lost the right engine? Well, if we lost the right engine and we did this very same thing, then what we would see that we would be climbing the P factor on this blade And then what would happen is the distance for this would be very close. So the reason that loss of the left engine is the critical engine is because the arm for the right engine still running is so much farther out than what the arm would be for the left engine if it was the one running. So there's control, there's performance, and now what we're going to talk about is side slip. So let's take an airplane, for example, and let's first take a look at the attitude indicator. Let's say this is the attitude indicator. If I'm flying on two good engines, I need to see an attitude indicator that looks something like this. That would be proper. That would be no side slip on two engines. So if I'm with two engines right now, that would be no side slip. That would be the proper way to fly it, no side slip. But if I was flying that on one engine right now, I would be flying that with significant side slip. So, two engines, this is a good picture. One engine, this is a bad picture. Now, let's say I had one engine. On one engine operating, I don't want this. This would be bad. What I want instead is an airplane that looks like this. And this would be the picture I would want to see if the left engine is bad, it's down. So we'll go up here, two engines right here. I'm flying no side slip. If I have one engine, that would be flying it with side slip. Now, let's go down to this one. Here, if I have two engines running, then I would be flying this airplane in a side slip, which would not be good. But with only one engine running, and assuming that it's the left engine that's bad, I would be flying it in no side slip. Hope that makes sense. So remember, when we lose an engine, we're going to have a bank 3 to 5 degrees, and then the ball slightly to the good.